Welcome to MRE, your source for apocalyptic Christianity. And speaking of sources, what sources do you use to get your information? Do you read the newspaper? One of the many television news channels that we have? Maybe you use an app on your phone. Or perhaps you depend on carrier pigeons to keep you up to date on what's happening in the world. If so, you're probably not watching this anyway. Where do you get your food from? Do you go to the grocery store? Maybe you only buy your vegetables locally grown from a farmer's market and they must be organic. Maybe you hunt and grow your own food, perhaps. The sources that you decide to allow into your life will greatly affect who you are and what you believe. If all you do is watch the Food Network every extra waking moment you have, do you think that you might become a little bit obsessed with food? You'll certainly learn a great deal about food. Now, we are all very particular about who and what we let speak into our lives. And that's really not a bad thing. We should be careful about what we let influence us. David says in Psalms 101 that I will refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. He makes a choice. And his son Solomon says in Proverbs, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. It's very important who and what we choose to allow to influence our lives. I would bet that most of you who are watching right now are conservative Republicans who don't watch the liberal, Democratic influenced news channels. Now, why do you watch Fox News instead of CNN? Why do you trust the Jerusalem Post instead of Al Jazeera News? Because you believe that they more closely share your values. But what if you were raised in a home by two lesbian women with extreme liberal views, and from childhood, all you heard about the conservative viewpoint and Christians was how wrong and how evil it is? Do you think that your beliefs and your views would be different today? Most likely they would. And why is that? Because the voices that we listen to, the things that we see, the friends that we have, the places we shop, the commercials we half listen to playing in the background, they all influence us. Now, Christians, we do tend to live in a bubble of sorts. We do try and separate ourselves from the rest of the world, to not be influenced by the world, but to rather influence the world. And we may not acknowledge it much, but we do operate as if there is this perfect phrase that we could say, or some perfect social media post we could make that will cause people with opposing views to kind of come to their senses, realize the error of their ways and abandon everything that they have believed and valued for years to believe everything we believed and valued for years. Now, has that ever really worked? Would it work on you? Is there some piece of information that a liberal, left-wing, homosexual atheist could share with you that would make you abandon your faith in God and carry the flag for the other team? So if that wouldn't work on you, why do we think it will work on other people? Why do we think there is some perfect phrase that we could say that would be the thing that causes someone to abandon all their beliefs and align them with ours? Matthew 11, Jesus says this, "To what can I compare this generation? It is like children playing a game in the public square. They complain to their friends, we played wedding songs and you didn't dance. So we played funeral songs and you didn't mourn." For John, speaking of John the Baptist, he didn't spend his time eating and drinking. And you say, he's possessed by a demon. And the Son of Man, on the other hand, that's Jesus talking about himself, the Son of Man feasts and drinks, and you say, he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. But wisdom is shown to be right by its results. Results. Fruit. The finished product is what he's talking about. When something is in production or when something's being prepared, it has yet to reach its final state. And it's like remodeling your kitchen. It always gets uglier before it gets prettier. And while you are walking through that remodel project, things can get very discouraging, can't they? When you have this vision of the perfect kitchen, but there are all of these delays, and then now it's been 2 months, and you're still cooking dinner with a hot plate on the bathroom floor, you get a little frustrated by that, don't you? While we are on this earth, we are in the middle of a lifelong remodel. God is working on us. He's stripping away the old and putting us back together in such a way that we really reflect Jesus to the world. But the world, they don't see it that way, do they? They look at us and they see a total disaster. They see backward thinking chaos when they think of Christians. And they won't be convinced by our words alone. Paul writes this, "For a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires, will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear." Now, have you noticed that people are starting to get a little more angry about this fear pandemic? They're getting more aggressive about their opinions regarding it. And it doesn't matter how much new information may come out, no one is really going to change their opinion about it. Neither side of the aisle is going to suddenly say, "Oh, my bad, guys, I was way off, and you guys were right all along." It's not going to happen. So when you listen to a particular voice or an opinion or a belief long enough, it sinks into your heart. It becomes a part of your values. It becomes a part of you. And at that point, it takes oftentimes a flat-out miracle for you to change. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "I tell you the truth, it is very hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. I'll say it again, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God." The disciples were astounded. "Then who in the world can be saved?" they asked. Jesus looked at them intently and said, "Humanly speaking, it is impossible, but with God, everything is possible." Telling people that they are overreacting to the coronavirus won't convince them to change their mind. Getting angry with people who have views that oppose the Bible, it doesn't do any good. Most of this world have been listening to voices that oppose the voice of God for so long, they believe lies to be the truth. And those voices have been yelling for a long time. Luke chapter 23, "But the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and their voices prevailed." This is the world that we live in. And we aren't going to change that. The voices of the masses will prevail, whether they are right or wrong. It happened in Jesus' day, and it will continue happening today. But before you get too discouraged by that, look at what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 13 regarding this issue. "To those who listen to my teaching, more understanding will be given, and they will have an abundance of knowledge. But for those who are not listening, even what little understanding they have will be taken away from them. That is why I use parables. For they look, but they don't really see. They hear, but they don't really listen or understand." Instead of focusing on all of the negative and ungodly voices that are screaming at us, just focus on Jesus' teachings. Read the Gospels. Spend time learning everything you can about Jesus. Talk about Jesus with other believers when you can. You'll be listening to the right voice, and all of the other voices, they just won't bother you as much as they do. You won't be an angry person. You'll be a compassionate person. You won't be worried. You'll have peace. If you're feeling anxious or worried or stressed or discouraged, you're just listening to the wrong voices. Jesus never says anything that causes that stuff. His voice always carries with it peace and calm. Even if what he is saying is really hard to hear, there is still this undeniable peace within it. I think we all need to take a little break from letting in outside influences and voices that are not from Jesus speaking into our lives. And the easiest way to do that is to really just spend more time in the Bible. It is the primary way that Jesus speaks to us in these last days. So turn off your TV, put down that book, even if it's some Christian book, it doesn't matter, put it down, read through the Gospels. Study the words and teachings of Jesus. Dig into his teaching. Let his voice be the loudest voice in your head. And you'll notice that you won't be as bothered by all the other voices that this world is screaming at you.